I have a teenage daughter, all her friends, I mean, to them, Marc is God.
Today, I wanted to talk about Marc Jacobs and his influence on fashion and how he's one of the best American designers to ever exist.
He is an American genius in fashion.
He really built up Louis Vuitton to what we see it as today. Similar to Tom Ford at Gucci, they both brought a brand that was just luggage and bags into this luxury, ready to wear house, as both brands didn't really have archive or any heritage pieces to come before. I'm sure Bernard Arnault saw what Tom Ford did for Gucci and figured that the same could be done for Louis Vuitton. When it comes to Marc Jacobs working at Perry Ellis, he's mostly known for the grunge show that came out in 1992, and everyone says that he got fired shortly after that show. I think there was a little bit more nuance to be said about that whole situation. I'm not an expert, but it's to my understanding that if something doesn't do well commercially, then it's going to get clipped. It's not really about the artistic value all the time, but more of the numbers. And corporate business part of Perry Ellis just wasn't doing well at the time in general. So Marc Jacobs could have came out with any kind of show on the runway or whatever, he would have got fired shortly after regardless. The reason why I like Marc Jacobs so much is when you learn about the history, you learn how hard it was for him to kind of get to where he was at, being an American designer in that time. The way we see American designers now is a lot different than how they were perceived back then and before his generation. Basically, the history of fashion, the French were at the helm of fashion in general, and American designers definitely existed, but they were only really known within America. There's this book called The Battle of Versailles by Robin Givhan, and it gives really good context on the generation that came before Marc Jacobs, like Halston, Bill Blass, Donna Karan, Stephen Barrows, and what they had to do to get accepted by an international crowd to give people like Marc Jacobs the chance to be able to come creative directors at places like a Louis Vuitton in the future. Even with Bernard Arnault's blessing, Marc Jacobs still had to fight for his position as the French really didn't want him there. He had an article that came out around the time that he was appointed that kind of bashed corporate, so a lot of people turned on him, and he had to fight really hard to keep his position and prove himself, basically.
Oh, this is great. Like, first, I'm American. Nobody wants me here but Mr. Arnault. And then he takes me out to lunch and says, you're really going to have to fight to get things done here because, they don't want you.
Yeah.
And I was like, great. This is cool.
And like I said before, there was really no heritage, no archive. There wasn't even an atelier set up. There wasn't like a designer that was doing stuff in the 1920s that he could reference house codes. It was basically all what Marc Jacobs thought Louis Vuitton could be. Okay, so now we know that Louis Vuitton only really specialized in luggage and bags, specifically for women during the first era of like travel. Louis Vuitton was specially made for them. So in 1997, Marc Jacobs became the creative director at Louis Vuitton. We see this collection come out, and to everyone's surprise, especially Bernard Arnault's, Marc Jacobs didn't have any bags on the runway at all. This was more of like a young designer's I'm here and I'm in charge moment, and also to make a statement of like, this is what Louis Vuitton was known for, but this is the new direction that we're going to take now, and I'm at the helm of it. Marc Jacobs later goes on to make some of the most interesting bags I've seen. The patchwork bag that was kind of like a collage of different Louis Vuitton bags at the time. Very rare, and only a few were made. Then there's a bag by Richard Prince, and this bag was also featured in Sex of the City.
That is not what I think it is.
Don't know, open it.
My very own Louis Vuitton.
You have this like weird looking trash bag that resembles the Demna bag, but this bag from Louis Vuitton came out in like 2011. There's a really great documentary by Louis Prigent, and it follows Marc Jacobs around the Louis Vuitton era, and it kind of documents all the hard work that goes into making one of these Louis Vuitton shows a reality. In this documentary, Bernard Arnault calls Marc Jacobs the Ralph Lauren of the 21st century.
Marc Jacobs, ça peut être le Ralph Lauren du XXIe siècle. Le premier créateur américain aujourd'hui, dans tous les classements, il est en tête des créateurs américains. Je crois que le potentiel est très grand. The sky is the limit.
Marc Jacobs LV was so ahead of the curve in many ways, not only having the ready to wear be so practical and durable in this deluxe way, but also in his collabs. One of the most notable collabs that he's done with Louis Vuitton is the Steven Sprouse collab. And Steven Sprouse was this artist in the 80s, really known for his art and fashion design. They got together for a collab, and the collab consisted of Steven Sprouse's handwritten signature, basically, on the Speedy bag, which also ended up being like a bunch more bags that it was included on. One of the things that Louis Vuitton told him he couldn't do was change the monogram. This did amazing. It's still like super sought after as of now, and also ended up being brought back in 2009 once Steven Sprouse died, and Marc Jacobs eventually came out with it again for his own brand. My personal favorite collab from Marc Jacobs in this era is the Takashi Murakami collab. Takashi Murakami is a Japanese artist and basically was a play on the monogram again. They took the two color brown and gold monogram and made it 33 colors. Once again, it did really well. A lot of celebrities were seen in it. And also, Takashi Murakami came out with a short animated film to promote the collab. How I got introduced to Takashi Murakami at the time was right after that, he also designed the cover for Kanye's graduation album. Another notable collab was with Richard Prince, and for this show, he had runway models come down. They all were wearing like these nurse outfits, and their hats all spelled Louis Vuitton. And also, there was a bag that came out with this as well that was really popular. You have a CDG collab in 2008 with Ray Kawakubo, and another really popular artist, Yayoi Kasuma. Um, she's really known for her polka dots, and they had a collab as well. So in that documentary that I mentioned earlier, you really get to see how extreme and hectic it is to finish a whole line. Mark talks about how he's exhausted from time to time and how he really like rejuvenates himself by going to see art. And he has an interview outside of the documentary where he talks about how Marcel Duchamp is one of his favorite artists, and the piece with the mustache on the Mona Lisa is the one that he loves so much.
My favorite artwork ever was, or is, the LH au cul by Marcel Duchamp, the Mona Lisa with the mustache. And I kind of, again, I love, well, I mean, I'm a big believer in the whole Duchamp sort of thinking, you know, the idea of a urinal as a piece of art.
And it got me thinking about another creative director at Louis Vuitton, Virgil, who also is a big fan of Duchamp.
I'm super obsessed with Duchamp, super obsessed with ready-made. You know, this idea that an artist like overthought the game, you know, understood the parameters, provided something provocative, provided something that became a launch pad for other forms of art.
So that got me thinking maybe the secret to being a creative director is thinking like Marcel Duchamp. Mark always seemed like he had a great working relationship with everyone, including his longtime business partner, Robert Duffy. All the cutters, sewers, pattern makers, interns, people who worked at the stores all seemed like they were a part of a family, very included, like a very good work environment. You also have Tremaine Emery, who was a designer at Supreme and Denim Tears. He used to work at Marc Jacobs at a collection store in London, and he always talks about how much of an opportunity and how blessed he was to work at Marc Jacobs. Mark was also really early on in accepting with working with like urban artists. He worked with Pharrell and Ego in 2004, and they made the Millionaire glasses. This also re-released in 2008 after doing so well. And then Virgil took that and made the 1.1 millionaire shades when he was at the helm of Louis Vuitton. Pharrell has a deep history with working with Louis Vuitton. You have that in 2004, and then he also did a DJ set for one of the shows in 2005. And he also worked with one of their jewelry designers, Camille McKelly, with a jewelry brand line called Blisson. It's understandable why Pharrell ended up getting the creative director spot because he already had such history with working in fashion, like the Chanel stuff, and he also worked with Louis Vuitton for years.
I never imagined in millions of years that I would ever have the opportunity to create for such a prestigious fashion house, the most prestigious fashion house in the game.
You also have the Louis Vuitton shoes by Kanye that came out in 2009, and this was also under the creative direction of Marc Jacobs.
Of course, Kanye's collaboration with Fabrizio on the shoes. So, again, I'm a part of a great team at Vuitton, and I'm very proud that everybody has their energy and their inspirations.
Marc Jacobs also had a very interesting relationship with Lil' Kim. He had her dressed up as Joan of Arc in one of his ads for Marc Jacobs. I guess I should say that he also had a Marc Jacobs line, and then he also had a Marc by Marc Jacobs diffusion line. With the diffusion line, you always saw Lil Wayne wearing the camo shorts and the Vans. He raps about it a lot too. And with Lil Kim, he styled her for all of her court appearances during her trial before she went to prison. And he also came out with a shirt that says Marc Jacobs loves Lil Kim, and all the money received from that was donated to a charity. So I really love the Louis Vuitton woman under Marc Jacobs, as she's not just dressing up for glamour. She's very understandable and smart, and she's like a creation of her own invention, especially in this time in the 2000s where I feel like we're kind of moving away from the Y2K stuff and getting into this like pre-Jersey Shore kind of gaudy era. Mark was very true to himself and had this like very relatable, classy, like sexy, chic approach. APC did a really good job at this look as well, as they also presented this very like, timeless Parisian chic. I love how Marc Jacob always talks about how fashion and luxury is like not a necessity, and the beauty in that as it's a part of the art of living. To me, Marc Jacobs has a very humble and relatable quality about himself, especially when he talks about perfection and insecurity, and always thinking that someone else is doing it better than him. He talks about how therapy and spirituality has really helped him live in the moment and not compare himself to anyone else. How it's best to stick to yourself and your own path and to really live in the moment.
When I'm in the moment and doing my thing, I'm safe and I'm good and everything's fine. All is perfect. But when I look over my shoulder and say, oh God, they're so much better, or that one did it this better than we did, then, you kind of get lost. It's like living in the past or living in the future. Those aren't real. It's like the moment is now, and that's where safety and comfort and all that good stuff is. So
with his record-breaking amount of awards from the CFDA, I think he has 9, and he was like nominated over 20 times. Mark has been very successful and relevant throughout the years, before, during, and after his LV phase. And for now, like I just wanted to speak on an American designer and his influence, especially on me growing up and seeing all the collabs that he did do, and not really fully understanding it and being able to like connect the dots until I got older. So I'm very appreciative of that. So I hope you like this video, and I will see you on the next one.